Hi, friends. Welcome back to Not Again, the podcast that brings college-level analysis to preschool-level content. I'm one of your hosts, Rebecca, and with me today, as promised, is my good friend, Adele.
Hi.
Hi, who is...
Sorry, I'm here early.
No,
so
you're
excited.
We're excited. I should have let you say hi. I was just going to I don't know. I'm supposed to professionally introduce you. I failed miserably with Martin.
This makes sense.
So we invited Martin. Martin is a mutual friend. We invited Martin on or I guess I did because Alan wasn't there, to talk about Brave, because Brave is a kid's movie. That's our podcast. And it's about ostensibly about Scotland, and Martin was Scottish. So that was kind of their forte. And also they study literature as well. So it was kind of like a perfect thing for them to analyze and join us with. Our subject matter today, Kung Fu Panda, specifically Kung Fu Panda 2, but I feel like we're kind of leak into discussion of 1 and 3. Adele, you have a couple qualifying pieces of authority behind you. One being that you feel positively about these movies, which I love. This is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, because we don't often display positivity on this podcast. So that's one. And the other is that you have some artistic background. You want to tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I would hesitate to call myself an authority. It's very generous of you, but I have been spending a lot of my time, basically my whole life, drawing. I do have a little bit of kind of classical drawing education, but a lot of it is just self-taught. And so animation, the kind of behind the scenes, how things are made, I love that kind of stuff. And I think that the Kung Fu Panda movies, they really shine in the animation sphere of just like the technical accomplishments that you can have, the composition, the color work. The first movie, not quite so much, but from the second movie onward, I think it's just a fantastic example of a lot of different things that you can achieve with the medium. I do also, I was introduced to the Kung Fu Panda franchise because I took Mandarin Chinese for 5 years when I was in grade school, through high school and a little bit in middle school. And I took some Chinese history when I was in college. Again, not an authority. I'm just a white, basic kind of person. But I find that these movies are very authentic. My Chinese teachers who were from China, they loved these movies. They loved being able to show them to us and us discussing the kind of the culture and the art and the influences. So I just find all that kind of stuff really enjoyable.
I do too, but with less training. But I like learning languages. I think it's a gateway into other people's culture. And I have also heard that Kung Fu Panda did a good job with the Chinese culture, which is something that we need to talk about, because while they do have Chinese actors prevalently in at least the second movie, I believe as long as Lucy Liu and Jackie Chan. Is Jackie Chan Chinese? I'd have to look that up.
Yes, Jackie Chan's Chinese.
I wasn't sure if he was from... Okay. He, I assume they're in the first movie as well. They still do the kind of thing of like putting white people at the forefront as both the hero and the villain. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. But I heard that, they did a good job. And as I was watching it, I saw a lot of respect and reverence. I didn't see them making fun of any particular culture or historical background or anything like that, which was cool. But when I was watching that Saberspark video about White Snake, I was about to say White Dragon, that's not it, White Snake, I think is what it's called. I immediately watched that movie and loved it. He was saying that Kung Fu Panda, being such a good representation of Chinese culture, kind of kickstarted the Chinese foray into animation, kind of just like gave them the drive, the push they needed to make a name for themselves there, because they essentially said, according to him, why is this amazing movie about China coming out of America? We should have amazing movies about China coming out of China. And then White Snake happened. And again, that's according to Saberspark, but it sounds legit. And White Snake is fantastic. I appreciate that they tried to say, hey, we're going to take this back. We're going to take our own culture back and show you how it's done.
Sure, yeah. And I think that what's interesting about Kung Fu Panda is the first movie is just a DreamWorks film, as in it was created in America. But the second movie is actually a co-production where a Chinese studio worked with DreamWorks to make that movie. I don't think that the third movie worked with that studio. I think that might have just been DreamWorks again. But that's my understanding, is that Kung Fu Panda did well in China, and then they brought on this Chinese studio. And I think that's probably why I like the second one is my favorite. But yeah, I think it's...
oh, yeah, that's why we're talking about... I suppose I should have... This isn't Bex 2, the sequel. Why were we talking about the second one? Because we couldn't talk about all three, and when I asked, you said, if we have to talk about just one, talk about the second one. That's why...
Yes, the second one is the one to talk about.
That's why we're talking about two and not one, which would make more logical sense to start at the beginning. But it's not like we're doing a 20-part series on... I'm sure you can start a Kung Fu Panda podcast if you want.
I would love to.
Yeah, I've heard podcasts about incredibly specific subjects, so it wouldn't even be weird. People would probably be into it, so, consider it. But for our purposes, just one.
Yes,
one
we'll
two-parter.
just do the one, which is totally fine and fair. I don't want to take up all of everybody else's time on Earth with Kung Fu Panda. I have thought about doing some sort of like video, like here you can see exactly like the choices being made, but I don't know. That's a lot of work.
That could work, yeah.
It's a lot of work.
YouTube or something. Yes, it takes. I wouldn't take that on at the moment, but if I had more free time, I would definitely encourage that and even help. But anyway, so I will go into a little bit of my history with Kung Fu Panda, limited as it is. But first, I figured it would help since we are not at our heart a review podcast. We are an analysis podcast where we just go into way too much detail. I thought it would help for people who have not seen the series, or it's been a while, or they haven't seen the second one, but they've seen the first one, to just get a quick recap of the overall plot. And you seem like the best person to do that, so if you could just give us a quick rundown, main character and his arcs, and what the plot is, antagonists, stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. So spoiler alert for anybody who cares about that kind of thing.
I've been trying for 29 episodes to put in a spoiler alert, and I always forget, and you immediately remember. So
there you go. Spoiler alert for anybody out there. I highly, highly encourage you, go watch these movies. I think that the first one is probably the weakest. So if you get to the end of that one and you're kind of like, I don't know, I think you should at least try the second one. Just to throw out my 2 cents there on that. But to summarize the movies, these movies are focused on a panda named Po. In the first movie, we see Po is a nerd. He's a kung fu nerd. There is a village that he lives in with his dad, who's a goose. It's so silly to just recount movies like this.
I know, I love it.
He lives with his dad, and they work in a restaurant, a noodle shop together. And to protect the village, a group of martial arts fighters known as the Furious Five are constantly training and going on adventures to beat up the bad guys, basically. And so Po, he loves the Furious Five, huge fan, has action figures of them. And through a series of kind of misfortunate events, Po ends up in this ceremony where they're going to decide amongst the Furious Five who is going to be given the title of Dragon Warrior. This is pretty important for the whole series, so I'm emphasizing this part of the movie.
Yeah, because they keep referring to him as that later and stuff like that. So
yes.
Important.
Yes. So what happens is that Po has a bunch of silly, klutzy accidents, and then he falls right in front of Master Oogway, who is the martial arts master of the village, who points to him and says, "You are going to be the Dragon Warrior." So, of course, the Furious Five are really upset. Other kung fu masters of the area very upset. The village is pretty upset, and Po's pretty upset because he's like, I don't know how to do kung fu. The struggle of the first movie is that Po doesn't know anything about martial arts. I will say that there are plenty of jokes about his weight. So if that's something that is uncomfortable for you, just be aware. For my biology side to come out a little bit, Po is considered like a fat, squishy panda. In real life, pandas are bear-shaped. They're not actually fat or overweight.
Yeah, we're going to have to get into that a little bit, but yeah.
Yes. And Po is able to overcome and win, and everyone's surprised. Po's a little surprised. And that's the basics of the first movie. For the second movie, we kind of jump right in. Po now fits in with the Furious Five. He gets along with his martial arts teacher a lot better, and there's a general understanding that he is the Dragon Warrior. He's the best kung fu martial artist of the area, and that's just that. And Po is given his next quest from his master, which is, now that you've mastered kung fu as the Dragon Warrior, you need to master inner peace. Of course, we have a brand new bad guy who's introduced. His name is Lord Shen. He's a peacock. Lord Shen is on a quest to dominate all of China. Very ambitious peacock. And he does this by inventing the gun. which is the ultimate kung fu.
I mean, it's a cannon.
Yes, it's a cannon.
It's not just like a shotgun or a pistol or something. That it's just like, hey,
Yes.
gun.
I say gun just for shorthand.
Yeah. But it's kind of funny. It's just like, I know what I'll do. I'll invent a gun. You know, it's a cannon.
Yes, that'll stop kung fu.
Yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, you can't really kung fu. Well, I mean, in this movie, you can kung fu away.
In this movie,
But,
yes,
usually.
exactly. So Po is now on this quest, this simultaneous quest that says, I'm going to master inner peace, and I have to stop this guy, Lord Shen. He has killed another kung fu master, Master Rhino. Rest in pieces, Master Rhino. It comes to find out that Po, his background, and how he became adopted by this Goose is what is blocking him from achieving inner peace. And so while he is fighting Lord Shen, he keeps having these moments that are kind of like PTSD flashbacks, where he's getting bits and pieces of this memory of this peacock, and he doesn't really know, what happened to him that has brought him to this moment. Now he's having these flashbacks. We learn that Shen, he has killed all of the pandas, and Po was the only panda to live through that genocide. And then, of course, we have a big battle with Shen. Very beautifully, well done, animated sequence of this incredible fight scene. And Po overcomes.
He kung fu's away those cannonballs, yes.
Kung fu's the cannonballs, which I think is a very lovely visual metaphor for Tai Chi. But we can get into that.
Yeah, we will,
we can get
for
into
sure.
that later.
Yeah. And also, I wanted to say, dear listeners, I am still just a little bit sick, so if I sound a little nasally, I apologize. Okay, that is the first two movies. Now, I will talk very briefly about my history, my interpretation of I don't know, how I didn't get into these movies rather than did. Mm-hmm. A couple things happened. Number one, if I remember correctly, Madagascar came out first. I did not like Madagascar.
Not my favorite film either.
Yeah, I didn't like the polygonal, whatever. I'm an English teacher, I should know this, but whatever. I didn't like the animation style. I thought it looked cheap. I didn't like the humor. I didn't like the story, any of it. And when I saw the trailer for Kung Fu Panda, first of all, I thought it was going to be a mockery of Chinese tradition because it was called Kung Fu Panda. And I don't think they sold it well as not a mockery of Chinese tradition. And also, on top of that, I was still experiencing the dislike of Madagascar, so I was wary about a DreamWorks film, although I liked Shrek just fine, but seeing
Everybody loves Shrek.
Yeah, exactly. Seeing Madagascar.
Can't hate Shrek.
Can't hate Shrek, despite the fact that if I watched it again, I'd probably find it problematic, but whatever. It was a product of its time, and it did what it needed to do. And on top of that, this is neither here nor there, but I'm just not a Jack Black fan. I have no problems with the dude whatsoever. His style of movie just isn't my style of movie. This isn't where I find him offensive or I hate him. I'm just like, not a fan, right? And so when you put a big star as the voice actor, that's usually supposed to be the draw. For me, it was the opposite. I was like, I do not care to hear from Jack Black. And honestly, I still need to talk about that because at least in movie 2, they ran up against a problem that I see in actually multiple DreamWorks movies, but not just DreamWorks movies, where they have a comedic main actor, and so they're trying to make it that actor movie, a Jack Black movie, or in the case of, I'm thinking of Eurovision, the Tale of the Fire Saga, or whatever it was that came out on Netflix, which is a Will Ferrell movie. They were trying to make it a Will Ferrell movie, and I found as I was watching it that it wasn't one. It had a pretty serious plot buried beneath the antics. And so we have this conflict of, we want a Jack Black movie, but we also have this really beautiful story. And those two, in my mind, it could have either been one or the other, but not both. It still was pretty good. I'm not going to lie. I liked the movie and I would watch it again and stuff. But there were parts where I was just like, actually, I would really prefer if you just took that out and we just stuck with the really cool plot and the pretty visuals and stuff like that. So I don't think those two elements married very well, in my opinion. Again, I don't have a problem with Jack Black. I think he can act. It's just, I didn't think this was a Jack Black movie. I think this was an homage or something similar to, the Chinese history and culture. And so it was a little bit jarring. But anyway, so I didn't watch Kung Fu Panda 1 for a long time. And then last night, because I knew we were going to record today, I tried to remember where I first saw part of Kung Fu Panda, the first one. because I know I did. I actually started watching it at some point, and now I can't remember. It's kind of coming back to me. I think it's this. This is my guess, and it sounds right. We have friends who also have young children, and they have a huge movie collection. And I think they must have put Kung Fu Panda on for their kids at one point while we were at their house. I think that sounds right, but I don't know. I actually don't. So somehow I encountered Kung Fu Panda 1, and I started watching it, and it started being a Jack Black movie, and I felt it was a little ridiculous. I don't know. It didn't grab me, and so I don't think I even finished it. Again, probably because it was just playing in the background while I was doing something else. And so I do know just a little bit of the beginning of the first one, and I'm now willing to go back and watch it with kind of a new perspective, especially hearing how much you like it. But then I did see the second one with you. Then I watched it again by myself just to absorb it, and finally I watched it a third time yesterday to take notes, and I have notes. So that being said, let's get into it. The movie opens with beautiful intro animation. I am quite aware of the shadow puppet theater. I probably was first introduced to it with, funnily enough, a different Jackie Chan property called Karate Kid, but it was in China, so it was definitely Kung Fu. And that movie, but the shadow puppet part was really cool. And then it came up again in a terrible show called Super Wings. Check out our Super Wings episode, wherever that is. But it's 2 of them, I think. And the very nope, not first episode. Warren hates that one. I always think of it as the first episode because we always have to skip the first one. The second episode of season 1 of that show, the sentient airplane robot, I have to say sentient at least once per episode or I shrivel up and die, he delivers a shadow puppet to a Chinese girl, and then they do a little puppet theater, and I actually love it. And so the intro animation is gorgeous, and I have no complaints.
That's fantastic.
It's in that style. And actually this
perfectly well done.
Yeah, this movie does a lot of kind of mixed media with animation. It tries a lot of different styles and somehow blends them very well. It doesn't feel jarring. They use each style to convey a different meaning or time in the story, and it works. Then we are introduced to the antagonist of this film, and I like the symbolism of the peacock as the villain. Typically we see a predator as the villain, I feel like, when in these movies that have these anthropomorphized animals, right? I can't think of an example.
That's how the first one is.
Oh, the first one has a predator.
Tai Lung, he's a snow leopard.
Oh, there you go.
Perfect. Very, very buff snow leopard.
Very buff.
Snow leopards do not look like that in real life.
Yes. I'm trying to think about Zootopia specifically played on that as well, with like the predators are being misrepresented. But in this one, it's a bird, which you don't actually see a lot. But I loved the symbolism because peacocks are symbols of kind of preening and vanity and strutting and things like that. And that's exactly what he was trying to do. He was trying to show off and make himself big and make himself beautiful, and he was full of himself. And so that, I think that worked out really well. And of course, his design was very cool.
Yes, and he, I really enjoy, there's a lot of like movements that he makes where either like that strut that you mentioned, he often tilts his head just like you would expect a real peacock to. It just feels very good just to watch him walk around and monologue to himself. Yeah.
And okay. So I'll switch these 2 notes because my next note, I'll say this very quickly. My next note is they have a very, I don't know if this was on purpose or not, probably not, but I mean, okay. This is me talking to myself. Every movie is borrowing from something. Okay. It just happens. Like there are parallels.
There's nothing original anymore.
There's nothing original. Exactly. So, and that happens with this one, as I'll bring up. There are a couple of things where I'm like, that's a little bit like this. But I don't think it was done as an intentional act of plagiarism. However, as they are building this weapon, this cannon or whatever for, what's his name? I've only seen it 3 times. The villain.
Lord Shen.
Lord Shen. I got a very like Mordor, Uruk-hai, Lord of the Rings vibe.
Sure, yeah. There's all the lava that you can kind of like lava, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Where they're melting down all of the metal. And I think that we don't have to get too much into like the color theory behind this, but I find it really interesting. Like you mentioned his design, like it looks very cool. I think it's a wonderful contrast because Po is a panda, right? He's black and white.
Yep.
And then Shen is a peacock. He's not peacock colored, so to speak. He doesn't have like the blue greeny kind of male peacock look. Instead, he's all white with red accents, and his henchmen, the wolves, are black. So he also has this theme of like a black and white villain going up against our black and white hero. Shen having the red accent, Poe has more of like a goldeny kind of accent to highlight the white
Yeah.
of his fur. And so I just think that that's so lovingly done. I could feel the love of the artists as they were working on this movie.
Yeah, they thought about the visuals a lot, for sure. I think that the symbolism of colors is always kind of relevant. And on Lord Shen, real quick, as I was going to say earlier, I am a Gary Oldman fan, almost in the same way that I'm not a Jack Black fan, where it's just like, yep, he's cool. So I'm not as, I guess the word for it now would be stan. I'm not a Gary Oldman stan, like I think
Sure.
I think that he's a good chameleon actor. They give him a role and he does it. And other people are like, I hate Gary Oldman. And I'm like, I can't possibly feel that strongly one way or the other about him. Mm-hmm. But I have no problem with his acting. I think he's a good enough actor. I also like Dustin Hoffman, I guess. Again, I mean, he's been in some movies I liked, let's put it that way. And again, I think he's a good actor. But to have these big, important roles combined with Jack Black playing the protagonist, all attributed to white men, where Jackie Chan and Lucy Liu are kind of sidelined. And I'm so sorry I have to look up her name because I know that she is a famous actress, but I haven't seen her in enough stuff to remember it. But she plays the goat fortune teller.
Oh, the soothsayer. Mm-hmm.
The soothsayer. Yeah. So they are there. And honestly, that's more representation. Michelle Yeoh, I think. It's Yeoh, and I'm so sorry if I've mispronounced that. My first thought was Yay, but then I was like, no, that's Molly Yeh we were just talking about in the group chat.
Michelle, yay!
Yeah, exactly. But Miss Michelle Yeoh, I think, and then James Hong as well as the Goose dad. So like they do have more Asian voice actors in this movie than I am typically used to seeing from movies that represent. I mean, even in Mulan, they did their best, but they really just went for, are you Asian? And so they had George Takei, who was Japanese, playing a Chinese. And I felt that was so insensitive to be like, well, you're Asian. That's close enough, right? Like, no, it's not. That's an entirely separate country. It's an entirely separate nationality. George Takei has a wonderful voice, so I can understand why they wanted him to play this big, powerful guy. I just wonder if they cast him because of his wonderful voice, or they cast him because he's Asian, right? And Mulan takes place in Asia, and it feels insensitive. So
definitely,
I like that they had Asian representation. I like that they even seem to find actually Chinese voice actors, where they're like, yeah, China is a country and there's people who come from it. I don't know if I sound racist as a white person right now. I'm sorry. I'm trying to say I want more representation.
I think that what you're saying, like, again, two white people discussing this may not be the best way to completely learn and digest this conversation. But currently with Raya the Last Dragon, there's a lot of discussion online that I've seen about the voice acting selection.
I don't know anything about that. So yeah.
Yes, there are a lot of Asian voice actors, as there should be. But the movie is specifically, it's inspired, influenced, created around Southeast Asian cultures. And there's a lot of East Asian actors.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that same exact issue of, is this because their name? Is this because Asian is Asian to the people creating the movie? How thorough is the representation when it's a little bit iffy?
Basically, the message that it sends is that kind of all of Asia is the same thing. They're all alike thing. And it's the wrong message. Right. You could put in the work to find a voice actor that's actually, I mean, it's such an expansive, that's like saying all Europeans are the same. This movie takes place in Italy, but we'll cast someone from Germany. Like, it's not that, like, same area of the world, maybe, but.
I think sometimes you see this with media, like, surrounding predominantly white characters, in which you will have mixed accents, so to speak. Where you will have like a German accent next to a London accent, next to a Scottish accent, and they're all speaking English.
Yes.
But I think that usually it's very well understood that those characters are coming from a different cultural background, whereas in these movies, these characters are supposed to all be coming from China or from Southeast Asia, which adds that layer of like,
Honestly, I'm just saying, basically, if I had recast it, I would have actually been okay with a white dude as the villain, simply because, hey, why not? White dudes have historically been villains, but the protagonist and or his kung fu master, whose name you would know, the adorable little bearded rodent thing. What is he?
Oh, Master Shifu. He is supposed to be a red panda, I think.
Is he? I was like, is that
Maybe
an eye? That's the
he's not.
rainforest. Like,
No, he's definitely not an
I
eye.
know. I was like, what is that? I'll look it up. Maybe Google will know. But yeah, so if they'd had his Kung Fu master at the very least be of Chinese descent, it would have sent a better message than like, we're willing to give Chinese actors roles, but only on the sidelines here. I mean, Angelina Jolie, when I look at the most predominantly featured in Kung Fu Panda 2, I would tentatively say side character. It's an ensemble cast, so not even really, but Tigress seems to be the most in the forefront, and Angelina Jolie is not. You know what I mean? So like, it would have been nice if they'd said, you know, we can find these main actors and find Chinese people to play them and things like that. Google says red panda. Okay. Thank you, Grandma Google. So, yeah, so he's a red panda. So that's that. We've talked too long about the voice acting. And again, what I usually say is I'm not an authority figure on this by any means. So for people who are interested in this debate and want to know more about it, I always encourage, go find people who are actually from that area of the world who are discussing it, and listen to them first.
If you're hearing this and you're like, I've never thought about this before, never heard of this before, you should start looking to see, you know, what do Chinese people have to say about these movies, or
if they say they're cool with it, if they say they like it, which apparently they were cool with it, and at the same time they were like, hey, we can do better, then take their opinion over ours, please. Yes, but this is just my impression.
Likely much more nuanced understanding is going to come from people whose cultures are being depicted than, you know, two white Americans. Right.
So, moving on from that, the animation in general is fantastic. I know we've already talked about that a bit, but it becomes the most apparent to me when I'm watching an animated feature. Hair and fur, I know, is incredibly difficult, but what I always really focus in on is fabric textures, when you can see individual threads. And I know that we saw this in, or we'll see this, I should say, because it hasn't come up yet, but in Poe's dad's noodle hat, you can tell it's yarn. But I always focus in on Tigress's outfit, the kind of shiny silk texture and the threads.
It's so well done.
It's very well done. And hey, guys, positivity. See, we can be positive about a movie. I mean, we can critique it and be positive. Yeah, Adele is gonna totally. I love these movies. Adele's for these movies, 100%. So yeah, I think that fabric texture, I mean, the way the light plays off of it, the animators showed up to work, man. And again, I was just wrong. When I was picturing this movie, I was picturing Madagascar level animation, and I was just blown away. I was totally wrong. And the other thing I was going to say is How to Train Your Dragon did this too, with fantastic animation, fantastic story. But I got to come up with like a Milkshake Duck-esque term for this. They Jack Black movied it, you know what I mean? Where they were a DreamWorks movie, and they had Jay Baruchel, who was a comedic actor, as their lead. And so they were like, we have to make this a funny DreamWorks-esque Jay movie. And it's like, no, actually, you have a really sweet story and beautiful plot lines. And so you can just take out all the rough nut and tough nut antics. Like, you can just have them act like real people.
I don't know. I kind of relate to those. I kind of relate to those characters as a rough and tumble. I don't know how to describe it. Here to have a good time kind of character. I definitely relate to that.
I think that they just pushed too hard in the subsequent movies. They were like, you have to be comic relief, and we're not going to give you any character development. And this is the obligatory bringing up of Avatar: The Last Airbender. But basically, the gold standard for comic relief still having character development as a fully developed character would be Sokka from that show. He's comic relief, but he also has a beautiful arc and relationships and everything like that. So... yeah. So I feel like sometimes DreamWorks has trouble marrying their comedic plots with their serious plots. But the animation is beautiful.
I personally don't have a problem outside of like the racial element, which I do have a problem with Jack Black and like the writing. I feel like it's toned down for Jack Black in all honesty.
Oh,
like,
for sure. It's not Nacho Libre Jack Black.
Yes, it's not like that level. I feel like I personally think that he's able to thread the needle in terms of he's a comedic and silly kind of character who does have this serious story that he's progressing through, and all of the other martial arts masters being very serious characters. I think that it does a pretty good job of just like emphasizing that he is who he is, and that's what makes him so special. I personally like that kind of theme.
Yeah,
throughout.
I'm trying to put my finger on it. I guess It's knowing when to be serious and when to be silly. So I'll pull on Brooklyn Nine-Nine for this. I actually love the television show Brooklyn Nine-Nine because again, we have a comedic actor as the lead, Andy Samberg, and that show does get silly and ridiculous, but they never bring the silly and ridiculous into the serious moments. They understand when it's time to get serious. And so like in the very first episode, they're joking. They've got Andy Samberg in a Speedo at one point, you know, it's a little ridiculous, but as soon as Captain Holt says, you know, I'm taking this so seriously because I'm a gay black police officer and I have worked really, really hard to get here and I'm not going to let anything mess this up. It's all serious. And then when they're through that emotional moment, then Andy Samberg's like, okay, time for comedy again. Whereas I'll point to a scene later where Poe's Goose Dad is, I'm just going to call him Goose Dad, is telling him about the story of his adoption. And it's very sweet. I have to say, I love baby Poe. He's so cute.
So cute.
Very sweet moment, very emotional, but they felt the need to end it on a joke. My life changed that day. I decided to make my soup without radishes. Oh, and I adopted you, right? I think that if I just said married and now I'm going to say divorced. If they divorced those moments a little bit and they kept the comedy as a way of maybe exiting a scene rather than being mixed into a dramatic or emotional scene, it would have worked better. Like the moment where Poe kind of brushes off Gary Oldman Peacock when he's like practicing the speech for like when Poe shows up and he's like, I'm going to say this. And then Poe's like, hey, how are you? I think that worked well. Right.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
that's my
but
thing.
I can see what you mean kind of in like the last conversation between Poe and Shen towards the end of the movie. Poe is making a lot of jokes in that moment. Shen is very seriously having this meltdown of like, how did you find inner peace? How did you defeat me? And Poe is just like tons of jokes. I think that the jokes are pretty funny. And Gary Oldman is pointing out like, you are not making sense, or like, this is so silly and ridiculous. So I could see how that could be a little bit jarring. I personally enjoy it, but
yeah, it's such a fine line too, because I'm not even sure that particular moment bothered me, because I think anytime he used his humor and, you know, not taking anything seriously attitude to throw off the villain, it's almost like a tactic at that point, right? So I didn't mind that so much, but yes, if they could just have pulled back on it a little and been like, yeah, we're gonna let Jack Black be Jack Black, but at the right times, I think that would have worked. He was being silly with Dustin Hoffman, Red Panda. That's how I do animal characters, by the way. You know, in the very beginning, he was like, this was the hardest time of my life. It was when Poe came into his life, and they were joshing with each other, and it made sense. It felt organic. The next one I have is this movie does waterbending better than the live action Avatar movie. I love, there's two scenes where there is just this droplet of water that basically symbolizes inner peace, right? Where first Master Shifu is using it to kind of demonstrate Tai Chi, I believe, is what you were saying. And then at the end, of course, Poe also uses it, and he's basically, the water droplet is traveling across him, and it's a very flowing movement, which I think is part of Tai Chi, is just to flow, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it's very much about the idea of like externalizing energy from your body, and you're supposed to, in your mind, and again, not an authority on Tai Chi or martial arts, in your mind, you're holding this energy between your hands like you are holding an invisible ball. So all of the movements are about how do you flow with this ball of energy, this object that you're imagining. And so they use the water droplet to represent what that actually would look like when we see Master Shifu, Red Panda, Dustin Hoffman do that at the very beginning. And then we see when Poe has mastered inner peace, he's able to do that kind of motion as well. Not
only that, and it looks beautiful, but the way that they used that, the motion of the water droplet and his Tai Chi movements to introduce the rest of his flashback, to fill in the gaps of his memory, was expertly done. I have to say, I think that's my favorite scene.
And one of the most interesting visual themes is that we see that very first scene where Shifu, he does this water droplet Tai Chi demonstration. He has this very stereotypical foot movement that you see in Tai Chi. He moves his foot in this circle, and the camera completely focuses on this motion. And so when Poe is ready to let his traumatic memories flow back through him, we see him do that exact same motion. The music is almost identical, and it's this visual cue that like he's going to be able to do this form of martial arts now. And I just think that that's such a clever way to bring the audience back to that space when a whole entire movie has passed between those two points in
Absolutely.
time.
The parallels are great. And by the way, it actually doesn't, I mean, I'll bring up Avatar The Last Airbender if you talk about breakfast cereal. Like, I'll find a way. But it actually makes sense to bring it up here because the reason that his movements look similar is that the white dudes who created Avatar were intent on doing their research because they were trying to create the show as an homage, you know, a respectful look at this culture and this type of animation. And so they did their research. And so every type of bending is based on a different form of martial art. And water bending, I believe, is the one that was based on Tai Chi. But it could have been airbending as well.
For any enthusiasts out there, you can find the reference videos where they filmed a martial artist doing the choreography, the fight choreography. You can find those things on YouTube that were used to help animate in Avatar: The Last Airbender. I don't know if that exists for Kung Fu Panda 2.
Oh, I would love to see that, though. We'll look it up and I'll tweet
really,
about it. But yes,
that would be really fun.
It's very, and I have seen that, and I love that. I love that they did their research. I know it's not perfect. You know, that two white dudes created what is essentially a show based on Japanese style of animation, or that style of animation from that world, and representing clearly characters of color and from that area of the world. And I know that it's not perfect, but at least they tried to be respectful and make it, you know, a praise of this art style rather than stereotypical and, you know, exploitative. But I'm not going
mockery.
to. Right. This is another one of those times when I'd say just go find what people from that area of the world have to say and listen to them, not me. I like the show. I can't help it, right? I can't help that it's so good. But yeah, I love that they did their research and Tai Chi and stuff like that. It is very complicated. Yeah.
Yes, just like Kung Fu Panda, it's problematic in its own ways.
Yeah, we're gonna
I
get to
still
that
love
too.
it.
Yeah.
I love it. It's complicated. I can accept, you know, it has complex flaws that come from the complexities of the world that we live in. You know, politics is everywhere. And I can't just ignore that kind of stuff.
And I will say, I mean, I'm definitely going to be preaching to the choir here, but all the trolls online saying that social justice warriors are just swarming people, just waiting to cancel them, and this is coming out of nowhere. Like, no. What's happening is that the world is changing and people are gaining their voices and finding more ways of standing up for themselves. The internet helps, right? And so these problems have already existed. It's just that people are feeling more confident actually speaking out against them as opposed to staying quiet, especially since a long time ago, actually not even that long ago, like even present day, people sometimes have to stay quiet for their own safety because people will be violent towards them. So it's not like this came out of nowhere. It's that people are finally able to speak up in a lot of situations about things that have always been a problem, right? This has always been a problem. Is the difference is people are actually talking about it now. So I just wanted to say that real quick, get off my soapbox now. Let's talk about a different soapbox. Hold on, I have a different soapbox here. There are too many fat people love food jokes in this movie.
There's a lot of those. Yes, there's a lot of that. And it's just like, I just roll my eyes.
Yes.
I feel like it's a little bit different than the bog standard in Kung Fu Panda 2, at least. In Kung Fu Panda 1, this is not really the case. But in Kung Fu Panda 2, at the very least, it's not done in a hateful, like we hate Poe because he likes to eat type of way. But that's really all the positive that you can say about it.
I was going to say it's a low bar to clear, but
yes, exactly.
There are some harmful tropes that they avoid as well. It's done with a kind of lighthearted thing, but they're still perpetuating this idea that people are fat because they love food and they can't stop eating and all of that. And they do one too many jokes about it, but they don't linger on it, and they still portray Poe as incredibly capable, probably because of the result of the first movie. Like, the first movie had to do that legwork to show that he was capable, but they never once doubt his capability, and he is incredibly competent. And on top of that, speaking of just animal sizes in general, again, pandas are just, they're bears. They're not actually like overweight or round or anything like that, but animal size in general, they clearly put a lot of thought into how each and every single one of these animals would move and fight and maneuver.
Absolutely.
And I loved the attention to detail they put with that. From being able to have a snake participate in any kind of fight to the mantis's ability to move quickly and, you know, how Poe would use his size as an advantage, things like that. Very, very good.
Yes, it's very enjoyable to watch them all together.
Yes.
I like one of my favorite sequences, I think it's so creative, is in the last fight sequence with Viper, the snake. She does this puppet move where they knock one of the henchmen out and she wraps herself around his body and then is held up by one of the other Furious Five as she is then manipulating the body to like sword fight with characters as they go by.
Very
and
cool.
like that type of attention to detail is just
every fight scene is choreographed perfectly. I
just
mean,
fantastic.
Sometimes it moved too fast, but not actually too fast. It was just that I really wanted to linger on what happened. You know, like I wanted to break down every move, but when they needed to, they focused on like I always and when I say always, please understand I've seen this movie 3 times, so I mean each of the 3 times I've seen it. I focus on the first big fight scene when Tigress grabs a spear between her legs and kind of whips it into a dude. Like that was a really cool movement. So all the choreography of fights, very good. The fact that they don't just have them all fight in the exact same way, very good. They probably could have done without the fat people jokes. But, you know, it's not perfect. We're getting there. At the very least, we have a competent overweight character, which you don't often see. Again, not because overweight people aren't competent, but because they're not portrayed that way, and they need to be. My thought here at this point in the movie was, I guess everyone in this world survives on plants and tofu, considering that every creature, including bugs in this world, is aware. Like, they have a praying mantis, so like Zootopia, they basically focused on mammals. And so the implication was that they were eating bugs, basically. Like the burgers were made out of bugs and the lions and other predators who needed protein were eating insects. But in this world, literally everything from snakes to insects to mammals, all aware. I'm trying to avoid saying sentient, but you guys know I'm saying sentient.
Sure.
So I guess they're just all eating plants.
And they really just don't go into the logistics. I think it's probably for the best.
Yes.
Like, I think Zootopia, as an example, goes way too overboard in trying to justify and explain the world that they live in.
Yeah.
Whereas in this movie, there are real food items like the noodles that we see in the noodle shop and dumplings and rice and allusions to other foods that we don't see necessarily. Like, what is the protein in this? What is this broth made out of?
Yeah.
Like, we don't see that part.
Exactly. And they don't have to explain it because it's a kids movie. That's the point of this podcast is we ask these questions that they never really wanted us to ask or answer. And we're not supposed to, really. It's just fun to speculate.
Just fun to think about.
Yeah. So that's that. They eat tofu, whatever. I like that. Oh, yeah. No, I gave them kudos for this joke. They had good follow through. Tigress comes to get Po. We're still at the beginning of the movie, folks. That's why movies are always 2-parters. Tigress comes to get Po to say that bandits have arrived. And Po says, well, tell the musicians to start playing some action music because we're going to go fight the bandits. And then later, the musicians are playing action music. And I like to follow through on that joke. I thought it was a good, subtle piece of humor. And I like the little rabbit. And honestly, I love the instruments. Those were authentic as well. Everything was authentic. I think some beautiful instruments have come out of China. I don't know what any of them are called. Probably couldn't pronounce them again. I don't want to insult anybody, but they are beautiful.
Yes, and it's very fun to watch them. They're like fighting with these instruments at periods of time. And as the instruments are hitting, you know, different bad guys or different weapons, they make authentic sound effects like you would expect. And so like it just works. It just works. It all fits.
So then we get another fat people love food. I just wrote, every time I saw a fat joke, I wrote fat people love food, har har. But we moved on from that because we already talked about it. So, and then we already talked about how wonderful the action sequences are. I noted that it's difficult to give every character in an ensemble cast their chance to shine, basically, and to give them their own distinct personality and their chance to show that they are a valuable member of the cast as opposed to just kind of extra and they didn't know what to do with them. But they did accomplish that with this. You see all their different fighting styles and you see that they work together as a team and they put some care into that. And I appreciated that. It wasn't like we had Po and Tigress and those other guys, you know. But I miss Jackie Chan so much. I really love Jackie Chan movies. They're a big part of my childhood and he's such a sweet guy. So I hope he comes back into movies more at some point. I wrote a bit of Tangled got into my Kung Fu Panda. Oh. I was like, how did Tangled? Yeah, so in Tangled, spoiler alert for Tangled, skip forward 15 seconds. At the very end, she sees that she's painted these suns everywhere in her room because she subconsciously absorbed that image when she was a baby from the castle. I don't know if you've seen Tangled.
I have seen Tangled.
Okay, so and then like Po looks at the feather and like has that same kind of subconscious, like, I've seen this before as a baby moment. But again, that's one of those things where subconscious symbolism does not belong to Tangled. So whatever. So he sees the tail feather and it's like, it sparks a memory. And I said, I love the mixed media of animation, right? I guess it's not mixed media because it's all animation, but the mixed styles of animation.
Sure.
Because when he has that flashback.
Yes, there's a lot of sequences that are like anything that's taking place in the present moment of the movie has the DreamWorks, what you would expect, cut and dry 3D characters are in a 3D space, like the opening sequence where we learn about the villain that had the shadow puppetry. We have a couple of montages where the characters are still in 3 dimensions, but the lighting team has changed kind of the setting, so they have this 2D look to them. That I love that. I'm a sucker for that. And we have other sequences that are flashbacks that are 2D sequences to symbolize Poe's dreaming about these events that happened to him, or having nightmares about what it could be that happened to him. So I think that all that fits together, and it feels like a much more epic story because of all these different things that are going on and how naturally you just flow between one style and another.
Yes, and this is something that they attempted to do with The Secret Life of Pets 2, as we discussed in those episodes, but I guess technically they were successful in that the animation looked fine, the 2D animation segment, except it was the only 2D animation segment in the film, and it involved an incredibly misogynistic and very human fantasy coming from a small white rabbit. So, swing and a miss on that one, but this one they did it very well. I think we'll wrap up soon here with part 1 because we're about to get into the actual plot, even though we haven't actually gotten into the actual plot. So obviously the entire second episode will be about the plot. The first episode will just be us going off about, things that are in the first 5 minutes. I wrote Noodle Hat with an exclamation point because that's when we finally see it for the first time, when Poe's dad is reintroduced, I would say, because he was in the first movie. This is where we already talked about this, but this would be where in the plot Poe asks his dad about being adopted. And we get that sequence where we get the flashback and baby Poe, who is absolutely adorable. And I did feel the sincerity of it. And I think that where we'll stop for this episode is the representation of not only a single father being competent, but an adoptive father at that, and having that relationship be real, and some of the struggles of, an adoptive parent-child relationship coming through with, I now know I have quote unquote real parents or biological parents, and I also have this adoptive parent, and I'm conflicted about that, right? That kind of idea of, and the adoptive parent wanting to do best by their child and not hold them back and not stop them from finding out the truth about their past, but also not wanting to lose them. I thought that was done really well. And again, with these ostensibly ridiculous characters, we have a goose and a panda. It should be ridiculous, but they handled it with tact, I believe.
Yes. I think their relationship is it's a beautiful rendition of a loving, complicated relationship between two characters. Especially, I feel like you don't see this very often between fathers and sons, where we can understand the tension of both sides of the situation, of the anxieties of Mr. Ping, the goose father, as he thinks, my son is the dragon warrior and is doing all this dangerous stuff, and that makes me nervous. But also, what if he finds out his real past and is not around anymore? As well as Poe's anxiety of he loves his dad very much, but he's still, on his path to inner peace, must find where he came from. That's something that's preventing him from reaching that level in his kung fu practice. And so I just think that they handle that very well. It feels real. And it's very silly to think of like a goose and a panda talking in a noodle shop, but it genuinely feels very real to me.
Yeah, they have very real conversations too, like at the end when he's like, I'll cook. No, I'll cook. I was like, oh,
yes,
they've been studying my household. But yeah, no, I think that I always like seeing single parent representations because I feel like the existence of single parents kind of, I'm vindictive. I'll just admit it. If you don't know that by now, audience, I don't know where you've been, but I'm vindictive. And there are people out there who try to logically, in huge air quotes, fight back against the idea of gay couples because they're like, a child needs a mother and a father. And it's like, you have just thrown that in the face of every single parent who has ever lived. Excuse me. And so it kind of blows that argument up. Not that argument had any weight to it whatsoever. It's basically just like, I'm a bigot and I'm trying to justify it to myself. But I always want to bring up single parents at that moment and say they are strong, they are wonderful, they can raise children, and they don't need a mother and a father in that instance either. So it turns out that it's more about the people raising the child and not about the type of relationship or whatever. But that's neither here nor there.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, this is a hot take, but I really hate when people are bigoted. Like, it really bothers me.
You know, it bothers me too, I gotta say.
Yeah, well,
Just to throw that out there.
I thought I was alone in the world being bothered by bigots. No,
I hope not. I really hope not.
No. The internet is a terrible, terrible place that gives these people a voice, but it also gives voice to the people who are against them, and it sometimes I have to seek that out. But I feel better knowing there are other people out there going, shut up and sit down.
This sucks.
And I think that this movie does that. It says, shut up and sit down. Look at this adoptive father with his adopted son doing his very best. And in the end, the relationship is stronger than ever. And we'll get to that, obviously, when we get to the ending of the movie. So I think that was done really well.
Yeah, and I'll say that for the third movie, they explore some more complications in that relationship in a way that is also very authentic. And you could argue also kind of flies in the face of the you need a mother and a father type arguing points, so to speak.
The quote-unquote traditional family.
Traditional family.
Yeah, no, I actually saw, because there's like an end credit scene or something like that where they reveal that his father is alive or something like that, right? His biological father. And so that's going to be interesting when I eventually get around to seeing the third movie. And who knows, maybe we'll have you back to talk about that one. But Ooh. I know that I would have to really twist your arm and pull your leg and beg you to come back and talk about Kung Fu Panda some more.
Absolutely.
But for now, we will wrap up. Before I do my closing spiel, I would love it if you could just tell people where they can find you if they want to seek out more of your wonderfulness.
Oh, thank you. I've been so glad to be here. My name's Adele. You can find me on Twitter at Professor Batty. That's Batty. I just like drawing. I don't really know what else to say. I like drawing. I like looking at drawings. I like looking at a series of drawings shot on film in which it plays an animated sequence. So if you are... you like what I'm having to say about this, you can go find me over there on Twitter.
And that will be linked in the description as well, of course. And yeah, their art is fantastic and stuff like that. So I would highly recommend checking them out. As for me, I'm Bex when I'm online. I'm Rebecca in this podcast, but I'm Bex online. My Batman and Bruce Wayne personas are kind of boring.
How does Potato Lady fit into the Batman triangle we've got here?
Yeah, well, I kind of had to merge the two, I guess, after a while, and I became Potato Lady Bex. A lot of people will call me that as well. But yeah, so speaking of Potato Lady, you can find me specifically on Twitter at BexGoose, BexGoos. I'm going to say all this really quickly because if this isn't your first episode, you've heard this before, and also this is all in the description because I just copy pasted at this point. But you can find me there. You can find Not Again Podcast at Not Again Pod. We sometimes tweet stuff. Sometimes we even talk about parenting. And by we, I mean I. My husband, Alan, who is the normal co-host or usual co-host, he's not exactly normal, where none of us are normal here, is not really, he's just kind of off the grid. So I tweet everywhere and everything. I do the socials. We also have a Facebook group, even though Facebook is evil. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/notagainpod. And we have merch. And I just simplified our Patreon to have only 3 tiers because the higher tiers were getting ridiculous. But we also have like buy me a coffee and stuff like that. So basically scroll down to the description to learn more about Adele and myself and this podcast. And until next time, friends, thank you for listening. Thank you for existing. Thank you for helping us to maintain our marbles for one more week. We will see you next week to talk about the rest of Kung Fu Panda 2. Until then, I'm Rebecca.
I'm Adele.
Bye, friends.
Bye.
I'm wondering if maybe we should actually do 2 recording sessions.
That is entirely up to you. We haven't even begun
we're
to talk about communist China
Yeah,
yet,
we haven't even gotten to the actual plot.